There's a meme, not quite a meme, a little fragment of conversation going around on the internet. It has the beginning question of why, because they are so sour and inedible in their default state, why would lemons evolve to be as they are? And the answer provided online is that lemons are not a naturally occurring fruit. They are genetically adapted by humans, a cultivar over generations. They come from a sour orange and a citron. And then there's another thing about, well, no, wait a minute, but those are sour anyway, so you're not really answering the question. But once that answer was out there, of course, the next response is, well, so maybe life really didn't give us lemons. But if that's true, then of course the logical next sentiment in this thread is if life doesn't give you lemons, we make them ourselves. And we do, don't we? Now, the congregation I grew up in split when I was 20 years old. It was a dramatic affair. There was fighting, controversy over power and authority, and all expressed through the heat of passions about music. It wasn't the only time that church has broken my heart, before then or since, but it was a hard and deep one. And there's some blessings amidst the heartache. There's a new congregation that continues to meet after, 16 years or more, out in Alameda. Imperfect world, it might be the least often repeated phrase in our mission statement, but it's actually probably the most important words in my mind. So we'd say to inspire joy and justice in an imperfect world, to name that this world, this life, this community, all that we do, all that we live in is imperfect, is marred by the realities of life. And isn't that a blessing? The good news, my colleague Elizabeth Wynn likes to say, the good news is we are already saved from perfection. Already saved from that norm, that perfect ideal that we get it in our heads to strive for. And because though we get that so deep in us that we are supposed to be striving for that perfection, we find ourselves in this life disappointed over and over again, disappointed in ourselves, disappointed in one another, disappointed by the world. And I think when we say disappointment, maybe that's the smallest word we have for heartbreak. This is how my teacher David White talks about it in this beautiful book, Consolations, the underlying solace of everyday words. It says, disappointment is inescapable but necessary, a misunderstood mercy, and when approached properly, an agency for transformation and the hidden underground engine of trust and generosity in a human life. The attempt to create a life devoid of disappointment is the attempt to avoid the vulnerabilities that make the conversations of life real. To avoid the vulnerabilities that make the conversations of life real, moving, and lifelike, the attempt to avoid our own necessary and merciful heartbreak. It's been true in my life that whenever my heart breaks open, whenever my heart breaks because of a relationship or a congregation, it can break open and lead me to discover new depths to hold and heal. It can bring me to growth and new life, or it can wall off and harden. It can heal in ways that don't fully heal, that twist into defensive and weakened shapes. Disappointment, says David White, is the first fruitful foundation of genuine heartbreak from which we risk ourselves in a marriage, in work, in friendship, or with life itself. A fruitful foundation. And so we all learn how to cope with disappointing imperfections in our own ways. You know, I try my best to keep from disappointing people. So I'm more likely to hide, to flash a false smile, to say yes before I've even really asked myself how I feel. Oh, and then if the truth comes out, that I didn't really want to do that thing I'd said I'd do, if the truth comes out, as it inevitably does in real relationships of any longevity, then that disappointment is even worse. And so I've disappointed you. I'm sure ministers will disappoint you. You and your next minister, I'm sure, will find ways to disappoint one another. Church, congregational life, spiritual community, it'll disappoint you. Life will disappoint you. And the question is, what will you do when that happens? It's the question of that first text, the earliest one we know of people writing about this question of theodicy, of trying to understand suffering and evil, the book of Job. It's this tracing a journey of spiritual heartbreak. First, the invading armies come and they kill his people and his livestock, and then the fire comes and destroys all of his fields, and the storm comes and kills his children. It gets it's hyperbolic, right, this story. It's mythopoetic. He gets sick, his body's failing him, it's covered in sores. How will you live with all this suffering? With all life's disappointing harshness? And his friends who stand in for the community around him, who preach to him the dominant theology of his people, they say, this must be a punishment for your sins. And he says in his heart, no, I know that this disappointment, this heartbreak, this suffering, it's not what I deserve. I haven't done something to bring this on. It's not true. It doesn't make sense that suffering is punishment for sin, that prosperity is a reward for goodness. Look at all of those wealthy people out there, he says, doing so well. They're not better in their hearts than me. The theology he finds, the theology of his people, is not adequate to the reality of his lived experience. The lived experience of the heartbreaking doesn't fit into the framework of mind that's been handed down. Rosemary Kenichi, who was a professor at Starr King School for the Ministry before my time there, she was a Catholic nun, a Roman Catholic nun, and taught for many years there, retired, and one of the gems of her wisdom lived on in the teachings through at least my time there. She said that this inevitability, that life's experience will come into conflict with that which we've been given, the theology we've inherited. In these moments that shake our ground we stand on, that shake the theological ground of our lives, we have three choices. We can comply with the belief systems that we've been given and deny one's own lived experience. A lot of people do this. We stay trying to belong by denying the reality of our own truth. Second, she says you can abandon your faith, cut ties, cut loose from your own religious community, and head off on your own. And we do that too. That's, I know, a part of many of the journey of Unitarian Universalists. She says you can deny your own experience, you can deny the religious tradition you've been given, or you can become a theologian. What will you do with the impasse that life gives you between what you've inherited and what life throws at you? What will you do with the disappointments of life? Become a theologian. The measure of our courage, says David White, is the measure of our willingness to embrace disappointment, to turn towards it rather than away. The understanding that every real conversation of life involves having our hearts broken somewhere along the way, and that there is no sincere path we can follow where we will not be fully and immeasurably let down and brought to earth. And where what initially looks like a betrayal eventually puts real ground under our feet. The great question in disappointment is whether we allow it to bring us to ground, to a firmer sense of ourself, a surer sense of our world and what is good and possible for us in that world, or whether we experience it only as a wound that makes us retreat from further participation. The call of our faith, the choice to belong to a spiritual community like this, is to choose the path of growing one's own heart in the face of the world's radical imperfection. The meeting I remember from that moment of my church splitting was a congregational meeting, and there was pain and anguish in every heart there. And at one point, an elder in the community stood up when it was her turn to speak and asked, could we sing a song? And she was shouted down, no. There was too much pressure and anxiety to take a pause for a song. And I was in more turmoil than I'd ever been in a meeting like that, and I waited my turn to speak, and I stood up, and in tears running down my face, and I was just blubbering out into the mic, but 20-year-old Marcus said, this isn't the community that raised me. The community that raised me doesn't shout down an elder when they invite us to sing. And I was lucky enough to still be part of a religious community that even in the midst of a great trauma could hear the cracked and sobbing, angry and confused, broken-hearted voice, and where one member got up and began to sing, "We are a gentle, angry people." And when everyone joined in, I knew I could continue on. I could grow my heart with those people, with all of our people, even as the disappointments have continued. Disappointment, David says, disappointment is a friend to transformation, a call to both accuracy and generosity in the assessment of ourself and others, a test of sincerity and a catalyst of resilience. Disappointment is just the initial meeting with the frontier of an evolving life, an invitation to reality, which we expected to be one particular way and turns out to be another. Often something more difficult, more overwhelming, and strangely, in the end, more rewarding. So I invite you, Unitarian Universalist congregation of Marin, to keep choosing imperfect community, to let it break your heart wide open. Let it grow your heart big enough to meet this imperfect world just as it is. Become a theologian and love this imperfect world just as it is. May it be so.